Let's talk about something that can shape our lives in powerful ways: setting goals, but not just any goals. Goals that honor God, goals that don't just chase success, but fulfill a greater purpose. When setting goals, the first and most crucial step is seeking God's vision. Too often, people make plans based on personal ambition, societal expectations, or temporary desires. They chase after success, financial security, recognition, or personal comfort, only to find that these things do not bring lasting fulfillment. The reason is simple: goals that are not rooted in God's purpose lack eternal value. Proverbs 3:05-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This verse reminds us that we must rely on God's wisdom rather than our limited human perspective. Seeking His vision means surrendering our own plans and allowing Him to guide us toward what truly matters. To seek God's vision for our goals, we must first develop a habit of prayer. Prayer is not just about asking God to bless our plans, but about aligning our hearts with His will. When we approach God with an open heart, He begins to reveal His purpose for our lives. This doesn't always happen in an instant. Sometimes God's direction unfolds over time as we remain faithful in prayer. Jesus Himself demonstrated the importance of seeking God's will through prayer. Before making major decisions such as choosing His disciples, He spent time in deep communion with the Father. If even Jesus sought God's direction before setting out on His mission, how much more should we? Prayer is not about bending God's will to match our desires, but about transforming our desires to reflect His perfect plan. Another way to seek God's vision is through His Word. The Bible is filled with wisdom, guidance, and promises that help shape our decisions. When we study Scripture, we begin to understand God's character and His priorities. He calls us to love others, serve selflessly, and seek His kingdom above all else. If our goals contradict these principles, then they are not aligned with His will. For example, if someone's goal is to achieve great wealth, but they neglect their family, act dishonestly, or become consumed by materialism, that goal is not in line with God's vision. However, if their goal is to use wealth as a tool to bless others, support ministries, and provide for their loved ones with integrity, then it aligns with God's greater purpose. God also speaks through circumstances, people, and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes doors close because God is redirecting us towards something better. Other times He places wise mentors in our lives who provide clarity and encouragement. Seeking godly counsel is an important step in discerning whether our goals are truly from Him. Proverbs 15:22 says, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." Surrounding ourselves with people who share our faith and values helps us stay accountable to God's vision rather than drifting towards selfish ambitions. One of the biggest obstacles to seeking God's vision is the temptation to take control. It is natural to want immediate answers and a clear roadmap for our future. However, God often reveals His plan one step at a time. This requires trust and patience. Abraham's story is a perfect example. God called him to leave his homeland without revealing the full picture of where he was going. Abraham had to trust that God's vision was better than his own understanding. In the same way, we may not always see the full scope of what God has planned, but if we walk in obedience, He will lead us in the right direction. Another important aspect of seeking God's vision is examining our motives. Are we setting goals for personal glory, or are we genuinely seeking to fulfill God's purpose? It's easy to disguise selfish ambitions as noble pursuits, but God knows our hearts. Psalm 139:23-24 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." When we ask God to examine our motives, He helps us refine our goals to align with His purpose. Fear can also prevent us from fully embracing God's vision. Sometimes the goals He places on our hearts seem too big, too risky, or too uncertain. But faith requires stepping out even when we don't have all the answers. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he had the courage to step out of the boat. But the moment he focused on the waves instead of Jesus, he began to sink. Likewise, when we focus on obstacles instead of trusting God, we lose sight of His vision. Setting goals in God's way means walking by faith, believing that he will provide the strength, wisdom, and resources needed to accomplish his plans. Ultimately, seeking God's vision means surrendering control and trusting that his plan is far greater than anything we could design for ourselves. It requires consistent prayer, studying his word, seeking wise counsel, and stepping forward in faith. When we align our goals with his purpose, we find not only success, but also deep, lasting fulfillment. Having faith for God-sized goals is one of the most challenging yet rewarding aspects of setting goals in God's way. Many people set small, comfortable goals that fit within their own abilities, but God often calls us to something much bigger than ourselves. He places dreams in our hearts that seem impossible by human standards. These goals are not meant to be accomplished in our own strength, but through faith in him. The Bible is filled with stories of people who were called to do things far beyond their capability. From Noah building an ark before ever seeing rain, to Moses leading millions of Israelites out of slavery, God consistently asks his people to trust him with the impossible. The key to achieving God-sized goals is not personal ability, but divine reliance. Faith begins with believing that if God has given a vision, he will also provide the means to accomplish it. Many people hesitate to pursue big goals because they feel unqualified or unprepared. This is a natural human response. But God does not call the equipped, he equips the called. When God called Gideon to lead Israel, Gideon doubted his own ability, claiming he was the weakest in his family and from the least important tribe. But God reassured him, saying, "I will be with you," which made all the difference. The same principle applies to anyone seeking to pursue a goal that feels beyond their reach. Faith means trusting that God's presence and power are enough, even when personal skills and resources seem lacking. One of the biggest challenges of having faith for God-sized goals is overcoming fear. Fear often whispers that the goal is too difficult, the opposition too strong, and failure too likely. Fear makes people settle for less than what God intended for them. However, faith is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to trust God despite fear. Joshua, when tasked with leading Israel into the promised land, was reminded multiple times by God to be strong and courageous. This repetition was necessary because even great leaders experience fear. The difference is that those who walk by faith do not allow fear to dictate their actions. They move forward, trusting that God will make a way. Faith also requires stepping out before seeing the full picture. Most people want all the details before they begin a journey, but God often reveals just enough for the next step. Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. He had to trust that God would guide him one step at a time. In the same way, pursuing a God-sized goal may not come with a clear roadmap. There will be moments of uncertainty, but faith means walking forward, trusting that God will direct each step. Many people delay taking action because they are waiting for the perfect conditions. But Ecclesiastes 11:04 warns that whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. Faith moves forward despite uncertainty. Doubt is another barrier to faith-driven goals. Doubt makes people question whether they really heard from God, whether they are capable, and whether it is worth the effort. Even the strongest believers wrestle with doubt. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water toward Jesus, he started sinking the moment he focused on the storm instead of Christ. The lesson here is simple. Doubt grows when we focus on circumstances rather than God's power. When pursuing a goal, the moment doubts arise, the response should not be to retreat, but to refocus on God's promises. This is why staying connected to his word is essential. Scripture is filled with reminders of God's faithfulness. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Faith-driven goals also require persistence. Many people give up when they face obstacles, assuming that resistance means they are on the wrong path. However, the presence of difficulty does not mean a goal is not from God. In fact, many times, opposition is a sign that the goal is significant. Nehemiah faced intense opposition when rebuilding Jerusalem's walls, but he stayed committed because he knew the work was God ordained. Jesus himself faced constant resistance, yet he never abandoned his mission. Faith means continuing even when progress is slow and the journey is hard. Faith for God-sized goals also requires patience. People often expect immediate results, but God works on his own timeline. Joseph had a dream that he would be a leader, but he spent years in slavery and prison before that dream was fulfilled. David was anointed as king, but had to wait many years before he actually sat on the throne. God's delays are not his denials. He often uses waiting periods to develop character, build endurance, and prepare people for the responsibilities that come with fulfilling a big goal. Those who trust God must be willing to wait without losing faith. Ultimately, faith is about complete dependence on God. It is about acknowledging that success is not based on personal effort alone, but on divine guidance and provision. It means surrendering control, trusting that God will open the right doors, provide the right resources, and give the necessary strength. God-sized goals stretch people beyond their limits, but they also lead to growth, transformation, and a deeper relationship with Him. Faith is the key that turns a God-given vision into reality.
Taking action in obedience is where faith moves from belief to reality. Many people have great dreams, God-given visions, and faith for the impossible, but they never step forward because they hesitate when it comes to action. They wait for perfect conditions, more confirmation, or a guarantee of success. However, faith without action is incomplete. James 2:26 says, "Faith without works is dead." God calls people to trust him, but he also requires them to move. Throughout the Bible, God rarely performed miracles without human participation. He told Moses to stretch out his staff before parting the Red Sea, instructed Joshua to march around Jericho before the walls fell, and asked Peter to cast his net before filling it with fish. Action and obedience is the bridge between God's promises and their fulfillment. One of the greatest obstacles to taking action is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. These hold people back from pursuing what God has placed in their hearts. Many assume that if a goal is from God, the journey will be smooth. But the reality is that obedience often requires stepping out in uncertainty. When God called Abraham to leave his homeland, he did not reveal the entire plan up front. Abraham had to take the first step before knowing the destination. In the same way, obedience requires moving forward even when the path is not fully clear. God often reveals his plan one step at a time, expecting his people to walk by faith, not by sight. Another challenge in taking action is procrastination. Many delay obedience because they believe there will be a better time to start. They wait for more resources, more confidence, or more clarity. However, waiting for perfect conditions often leads to inaction. Ecclesiastes 11:04 warns, "Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." If farmers waited for ideal weather before sowing seeds, they would never see a harvest. The same principle applies to any God-given goal. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. God honors those who step forward in faith, trusting that He will provide along the way. Taking action also requires perseverance. Many people start strong but give up when they face challenges. However, obstacles are not a sign to quit. They are opportunities for growth. In the story of Nehemiah, he faced opposition while rebuilding Jerusalem's walls. His enemies mocked him, threatened him, and tried to stop the work. But Nehemiah remained focused because he knew the work was from God. He told his opponents, "I am doing a great work and I cannot come down." This mindset is essential for anyone pursuing a God-given goal. When distractions, discouragement, or difficulties arise, staying committed is an act of obedience. Faith-filled action also requires humility. Sometimes God calls people to take steps that seem small, insignificant, or even illogical. Naaman, a commander in the Syrian army, was told to dip in the Jordan River 7 times to be healed of leprosy. Initially, he resisted because the instructions seemed too simple, but when he obeyed, he was completely healed. Many times, people hesitate to take action because they expect something dramatic or extraordinary. However, God often works through simple, consistent acts of obedience. Whether it is making a small decision, serving in a hidden place, or taking a slow but steady step forward, obedience in the little things leads to greater things. Another reason people hesitate to take action is because they focus on their own limitations. They look at their lack of skills, resources, or experience and assume they are not ready. However, God specializes in using ordinary people for extraordinary purposes. David was a shepherd before he became a king. Peter was a fisherman before he became a disciple. The key difference between those who fulfill their purpose and those who do not is obedience. God does not require perfection, he requires willingness. The moment a person steps forward in obedience, God provides what is needed. He opens doors, sends the right people, and gives strength for the journey. Obedience also means trusting God with the results. Many hesitate to take action because they fear failure. They wonder, what if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not good enough? But success in God's kingdom is not measured by human standards. It is measured by faithfulness. When Jesus told the parable of the talents, he did not commend the servant who buried his talent out of fear. He honored those who took action, even if their results varied. God values effort over excuses. Taking action in obedience is not about guaranteeing success. It is about demonstrating trust. When God gives an assignment, the responsibility is to obey. The outcome is in Him. Finally, taking action in obedience brings blessings. Many of God's promises are tied to obedience. In Deuteronomy 28, God lists blessings for those who follow His commands: provision, protection, and favor. The same principle applies today. When people step out in faith, God honors their obedience. He may not reveal the entire journey up front, but He will always be faithful to those who trust and obey. Trusting God's timing is one of the most difficult aspects of setting goals in His way. People naturally want to see results quickly, and waiting can feel frustrating, discouraging, and even painful. However, God's timing is always perfect. He sees the bigger picture, knows what is best, and operates according to His divine schedule. While people often feel impatient and wonder why things are not happening as quickly as they hoped, God is never late. The Bible is filled with examples of individuals who had to wait for God's promises to be fulfilled. Their stories teach valuable lessons about patience, faith, and the importance of trusting that God's plan is greater than human understanding. One of the greatest challenges of trusting God's timing is dealing with delays. Many times, when people pray for something or work towards a goal, they expect immediate answers or quick progress. When things do not happen as expected, doubt begins to creep in. It is easy to wonder if God has forgotten or if the goal was never meant to be. However, delays are not denials. They are often part of God's preparation process. Joseph, for example, had a dream that he would be a great leader, but before that dream came to pass, he was sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it seemed like nothing was happening, but God was working behind the scenes. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of power. The delay was not wasted time. It was a season of preparation. Waiting also tests faith and builds character. When everything happens quickly and easily, there is little need to rely on God. However, seasons of waiting force people to depend on Him completely. During these times, God refines character, removes distractions, and strengthens faith. David was anointed as king when he was still a young shepherd, but he had to wait many years before he actually took the throne. During that waiting period, he faced hardships, ran for his life, and learned how to trust God in difficult circumstances. If David had become king immediately, he would not have been ready to handle the responsibilities of leadership. The waiting season prepared him for what was ahead. Another reason God's timing is different from human expectations is that He often works in ways that people do not understand. Many assume that success and progress should follow a straightforward path, but God's ways are higher than human ways. Sometimes He allows delays, setbacks, or unexpected changes to teach important lessons or to guide people in a better direction. The Israelites were led out of Egypt and could have reached the promised land in a short amount of time, but God took them through the wilderness for 40 years. This journey was necessary to teach them obedience, trust, and dependence on Him. What seemed like a delay was actually part of a greater plan. Trusting God's timing also requires surrender. People like to plan their own lives, set their own schedules, and control their own outcome. When things do not go as planned, frustration arises. However, true faith means surrendering control and trusting that God knows what He is doing. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds believers to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. This means accepting that God's plan is better even when it does not align with personal expectations. Surrendering to his timing brings peace, while trying to force things before the right time leads to unnecessary stress and struggle. Another important aspect of trusting God's timing is recognizing that waiting is an active process, not a passive one. Many people think that waiting means doing nothing, but biblical waiting involves seeking God, preparing for what is ahead, and being faithful in the present moment. Noah had to wait years for the flood, but during that time he built the ark as God commanded. Esther had to wait for the right moment to approach the king, but she spent time fasting and preparing. Waiting is not wasted time. It is a season of growth, learning, and strengthening faith.